Egypt condemns Israel's systematic violations and escalation in Gaza, including collective punishment and obstruction of aid. Israel strikes Nasser Hospital in Gaza's Khan Yunis, killing at least 15 people. And Kiev aims to secure at least $1 billion every month from allies to buy U.S. weapons. You're watching Q News at 4 with me, Hen Youssef, and in the news today, Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati has addressed the extraordinary session of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Jeddah, condemning Israel's systematic violations and escalation in Gaza, including collective punishment and obstruction of aid. Abdulati underscored Egypt's pivotal humanitarian role, providing 70% of Gaza's aid and treating thousands of Palestinians. The Egyptian foreign minister demanded Israel allow unrestricted aid entry and held it fully responsible for the ongoing crisis and rejection of ceasefire efforts. He denounced Israeli expansion in the West Bank, violating international law and jeopardizing the two-state solution. Emphasizing Egypt's unwavering support for Palestinian rights and statehood, he welcomed new recognitions of Palestine and urged more countries to follow. Egypt firmly rejects forced displacement and any policies undermining Palestinian self-determination. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati has met with the Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi during the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Emergency Session in Jeddah to discuss Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon. They reviewed bilateral relations and emphasized ongoing coordination on shared concerns. The ministers exchanged views on Gaza's dire situation amid Israeli aggression and preparations for OIC ministerial action to halt the violence. They also addressed the Iranian nuclear file, stressing de-escalation and resuming peaceful negotiations with the IAEA and the United States. Abdulati highlighted Egypt's ceasefire efforts, humanitarian aid, and detainee release proposals. On Lebanon, Abdulati reaffirmed Egypt's call to end foreign interference and Israeli occupation. Regarding Syria, Egypt opposes any moves threatening its stability or regional peace. Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan has declared Israel's actions the gravest threat to regional peace, firmly rejecting any military control or forced displacement in Gaza. Speaking at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation emergency meeting in Jeddah, he reaffirmed Saudi Arabia's unwavering support for Egyptian and Qatari ceasefire efforts, emphasizing the Palestinian statehood is an inalienable right. He condemned Israel's unprecedented assault on Gaza, its blatant defiance of international law, and deliberate obstruction of humanitarian aid. Faisal called for urgent international intervention to halt Israeli crimes and highlighted Saudi efforts to unify Islamic stances against these violations. The OIC stressed that the Palestinian cause remains central, holding Israel fully responsible for the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. Palestine's UN representative Riyad Mansour has reaffirmed the inalienable right to establish an independent Palestinian state, condemning Israel's military control over Gaza and its obstruction of Palestinian statehood. He denounced Israel's illegal settlement expansion and called for intensified regional efforts to halt Israeli violations, highlighting the use of starvation as a weapon of war. He urged accountability for Israel's crimes in Gaza. Mansour emphasized Palestine's readiness to collaborate with all parties to resolve the Gaza crisis and rejected Netanyahu's rhetoric on Greater Israel. His remarks underscored the urgent need for justice and peace, delivered during the Organization of Islamic Cooperation's emergency meeting addressing the escalating humanitarian and political situation in Gaza. The Secretary-General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Hussein Ibrahim Taha, has condemned Israel's unprecedented assault on Gaza, highlighting the emergency meeting in Saudi Arabia convened in response to Israel's declared intent to impose full military control over Gaza. He criticized Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's Greater Israel rhetoric as an extension of incitement, extremism, and aggression, flagrantly violating state sovereignty, international law, and the UN Charter. Taha warned that such actions undermine efforts for a just and comprehensive peace based on the two-state solution. He stressed that Israel's ongoing crimes and massacres against Palestinians demand a more effective and impactful international response to halt this brutal aggression and restore prospects for peace. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has welcomed the diplomatic efforts by Egypt, Qatar and the United States to halt the war on Gaza, emphasizing the immense suffering of millions of Palestinians there. Speaking at the extraordinary session of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Fidan accused the Israeli government of seeking the extermination of Palestinians and stressed the urgent need for a ceasefire in the occupied territories. Fidan warned that without a ceasefire, Israel would continue its occupation and settlement expansion. He called for full support to Palestine through recognition of its independent state, the UN membership, and Gaza's reconstruction. He further highlighted Israel's broader destructive agenda, citing attacks on Syria, Lebanon, and Iran, which threaten the entire Middle East region. And for a deeper look on the story, we now move to Hala Al-Hamalawi in our newsroom. Hala.
Thank you so much, Hani. For further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by the political science professor and specialist in regional and international security, Dr. Ahmed Al-Shahat. Welcome to Q News, Dr. Ahmed. Now, in what ways does Egypt's condemnation of Israeli policies reflect its strategic interests in maintaining regional stability and its relations with both Western and Islamic countries?
First of all, good evening. The Egyptian state is participated in the summit in Jeddah. They wanted to form a front, an Islamic Arabic front, to vote their disapproval of the Israeli plan to annex the West Bank and Gaza. And also Egypt holds good relations with other states throughout the world, and they want the powers in Palestine to return to the negotiations table. and we want to stop this ongoing conflict. Also, we want to prevent the forced migration. That much is clear. So we use all diplomatic channels in which we participate to try to inform the international community on the different aspects of the Palestinian cause. We are also trying to pave the way to the UN upcoming conference, in which a plethora of states will clearly support the establishment of a Palestinian state. So this international movement is based on an Arabic movement and a regional base which wants to expose the Israelis and all their actions to the rest of the world. And we want to formulate a one front against all these actions.
Mm-hmm. So, sir, how effective can Egypt's diplomatic efforts be in pressuring Israel to allow unrestricted aid access amid the ongoing hostilities?
Naturally, there are pressures on the planned starvation imposed by Israel on the Palestinians. Lots of states want, even Israel or former allies of Israel like Germany and so on, they wanted to take actions against the planned starvation because, as you can see, the aid convoy and the trucks are grouped at the Rafah border crossing, and Israel prevents them from entering while they impose the starvation on the Palestinian people. So we're trying to deal with the United States of America as a number one intermediary and mediator. We want them to take action against all the aggressions committed by Israel. Even the imposed starvation plan realized by Israel. We want to open the Karam Abu Salim crossing so that relief will be received by those in need.
Allow me to ask you, how might Egypt's call for detainee releases and ceasefire proposals influence the conflict's humanitarian and political dimensions?
Naturally, when you have a deal, a permanent deal including the release of detainees, so this helps solve a major problem, a paradox. And we want to return to the state before October 7th, which can be done by the approval of the entry of the flows of aid convoys. So naturally, if they wanted peace and a permanent deal was sealed, and the war and the aggression is stopped, that must be done with guarantees by the Americans and other intermediary states. That must prioritize the flow of aid inside Gaza.
Yes. So what are the potential regional security implications of Israeli expansion in the West Bank for the two-state solution and the broader peace prospects?
After October 7th took place, Israel extorted and exploited this to launch its military operation, large military operations on the ground against the Palestinians. They wanted to bury the possibility of the two-state solution. They want the conflict to keep going and to continue. And now the two states solution has been drawn back because Israel wants to annex further lands.
Yes, so how could Egypt and Iran's dialogue on the Iranian nuclear file affect regional security dynamics and international negotiations as well?
It will impact it partially. Egypt is not a member of the negotiations with Iran, so that it will not be able to impact the stability of the region as a whole. The United States of America are the key negotiators, also Iran, as it happened in 2015. So they are the ones holding the keys to the regional stability in this matter, especially in the Bab el-Mandab crossing and the Mediterranean area. So if Iran stopped supporting its military arms and militias in the region, I think peace can be struck and a deal can be reached.
Well, that was Dr. Ahmed Al-Shahad joining us from Cairo. He is the political science professor and specialist in regional and international security. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us here on Q News. Now we go back again to Hani Saif in our studio. To you, Hani.
Thank you, Hala. Ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the latest developments in Gaza.
والله العظيم ولا حبة رز، والله العظيم ولا حبة عدس. ما فيش أكل، ما فيش شرب، عندي بنت سنتين ونص صارت تشرب.
Egypt has dispatched its 22nd humanitarian aid convoy to Gaza, including 3 fuel trucks and essential supplies such as food, medical items and hygiene products. The convoy, part of the Zed al-Izza Provision of Honor from Egypt to Gaza initiative, crossed from Rafah and awaits Israeli inspection at the Karm Abu Salim crossing before entering Gaza. This aid comes as Gaza faces its first ever recorded famine due to the ongoing Israeli blockade and conflict. The Egyptian Red Crescent continues coordinating relief efforts at the border. Israeli strikes on Nasser Hospital in Qnews, Gaza, have killed at least 15 people, including 5 journalists and a rescue worker. Among the dead was Hussein al-Masri, a Reuters cameraman. Another Reuters contractor, photographer Hatem Khalid, was injured in a second strike that hit after first responders and journalists arrived at the scene. Reuters confirmed the casualties and called for urgent medical aid for Khalid. The Israeli military confirmed a strike in the area and said an inquiry had been ordered. The Palestinian Journalists Syndicate condemned the attack, saying over 240 journalists have been killed in Gaza since October 2023. At least 28 Palestinians were killed and 84 injured in the past 24 hours in Gaza. The total death toll since Israel's offensive began in October of 2023 has reached 62,744, with over 158,000 wounded, most of them women and children. Since fighting resumed on March 18th, following a 2-month truce, 10,900 more Palestinians have been killed and 46,218 injured. Medical sources in Gaza reported that 11 people, including 2 children, died from famine and malnutrition in the past 24 hours alone. This brings the total deaths to 300, with 117 children among the victims. The worsening crisis is fueled by Israel's ongoing blockade and war since October 2023, which has severely limited food and medical supplies. Palestinian Foreign Minister Varsin Aghabakian has condemned the ongoing war in Gaza as genocidal, highlighting the severe humanitarian crisis and use of starvation as a weapon. Speaking during talks with the Slovenian Foreign Minister Tanja Fajon, Aghabakian said more than 250 Palestinians have died from famine and over 240 journalists have been killed in Gaza, surpassing all modern wars. She also criticized Israel's continued settlement expansion in the West Bank, calling them illegal and a direct threat to peace. Aghabakian called for a permanent ceasefire and the release of all hostages, saying both are essential steps towards lasting peace in the region. Israeli occupation forces have intensified attacks near Gaza City, with tanks and airstrikes hitting eastern and northern outskirts as smoke rose along the border. Witnesses reported continuous explosions overnight in Gaza's Zaytun and the Shajaya districts, with tanks shelling homes and roads in Sabra and demolishing buildings in Jabalia. The Israeli occupation army said operations in Jabalia are aimed at dismantling tunnels and expanding combat zones, claiming it prevents Hamas fighters from regrouping. Israel has approved a plan to seize Gaza City in what it calls Hamas' final stronghold, though mediators, Egypt and Qatar, continue efforts to revive ceasefire talks before the assault begins. Thick smoke rose over Gaza City after Israeli strikes as Defense Minister Israel Katz vowed to press on with a planned offensive despite warnings of famine. Katz said Gaza City would be razed unless Hamas agreed to end the war on Israel's terms and release all hostages. Israel approved the plan to seize the city earlier this month, calling it Hamas' final stronghold. The assault is expected to begin in weeks, leaving time for Egypt and Qatar to revive ceasefire talks. Hamas condemned the plan, saying it proves Israel is not serious about a truce, and warned Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would be held responsible for the hostages' lives. Gaza's media office says the enclave can no longer support another round of civilian evacuations, warning its shelter system has collapsed. It comes as Israel threatens an offensive on Gaza City, home to more than 1 million Palestinians. Gaza's media office says more than 2.4 million Palestinians are facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, with shelter capacity at breaking point. Only 10,000 tents have entered the Strip, just 4% of the 250,000 required. The statement blamed Israeli restrictions for blocking essential supplies and warned that the southern area, now overcrowded, can no longer take in more evacuees. It called for urgent international intervention to stop further military advances and deliver aid without conditions. Moving on to Lebanon, where an Israeli drone strike has killed 1 person in southern Lebanon's Ben Jbeil district. According to Lebanon's health ministry, the attack targeted a pickup truck on the Ain al-Mazrab-Tibnin road. Despite a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah reached in November, Israeli strikes in the region have continued almost daily. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kiev is aiming to secure at least $1 billion every month from allies to buy U.S. weapons through NATO's Pearl program. Speaking in Kiev alongside Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, Zelensky welcomed Norway's decision to join the initiative and praised its role in bolstering Ukraine's energy security amid Russian attacks. Støre reaffirmed his country's support for Ukraine's air defense and maritime capabilities, but said a peace agreement with Russia should precede any Western security guarantees. Zelensky added he will meet U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg today to discuss possible future talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Hello. First of all, Prime Minister, I have a question for you, but first of all...
Germany's Vice-Chancellor Lars Klingbeil has pledged continued support for Ukraine, urging Russia to show a serious interest in peace and calling for an immediate ceasefire. Speaking in Kiev after meeting Finance Minister Serhiy Marchenko, Klingbeil said Germany stands firmly with Ukraine and will continue providing security support. He stressed that peace talks can only begin once Russian President Vladimir Putin halts the fighting, adding that Western allies are working on long-term security guarantees for Kiev. The German Vice-Chancellor also highlighted the need to strengthen Ukraine's army and ramp up local arms production to bolster defense and deterrence.
Practically zero usage.
Polish President Karol Nawrocki has proposed new legislation that would restrict state benefits for Ukrainians living in Poland. Speaking in Warsaw, Nawrocki said welfare support and healthcare assistance should only be granted to those who are actively working in the country. He also stressed that the bill aims to curb Russian propaganda and foster what he called a relationship of true partnership and mutual respect between Poland and Ukraine. Nawrocki further urged that the legislation include a clause equating the Bandera symbol with Nazi and Soviet symbols under the criminal code. These are all the news we have for now, but here's a reminder of today's main stories. Egypt condemns Israel's systematic violations and escalation in Gaza, including collective punishment and obstruction of aid. Israel strikes Nasser Hospital in Gaza's Qnews, killing at least 15 people. And Kiev aims to secure at least $1 billion every month from allies to buy U.S. weapons. This concludes our news bulletin for this hour. Please don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at Q News EGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.